but with blood. Long before you and Jungkook, their fathers had already written their fate in violence. Both men were powerful, fierce mafia leaders, their names whispered in the underworld like curses. They were sworn enemies. Each strike answered with another, each betrayal answered with that. Their hatred was poison, spilling over into every corner of the city until one night their feud ended the only way it ever could. Both of them face to face, guns raised, range burning brighter than reason. They shot at the same time but collapsing, both bleeding out on the floor, their blood mixing like a final cruel reminder that neither could live without destroying the others. The city shivered when the news spread. Two kings had fallen and their empires stood in ruins, but hatred like theirs does not die with the man who carried it. It lingers, it waits. Jungkook was only 16 when he saw his father's lifeless body. The image seemed into him like fire on a skin. From that day, grief and fury became the bonds of his soul. He didn't cry, he didn't beg. He promised himself that his father's blood would not be spilled in vain. He would grow into something sharper, darker, more merciless than anyone who had ever dared to challenge the John name. Years shaped him like iron, forget and fire. At 29, Jungkook was no longer just a man, he was a shadow in human form, a notorious mafia boss whose dark aura made even his allies tremble. Some handsome, but with the kind of beauty that frightened. He was known of his merciless decisions. One word from his mouth could end a life. One look from his eye could make grown them kneel. For him, fear was not an accident. It was his greatest weapon, his sharpest tool of control. On the other side of the same bloody history, a little girl was losing her family too. Yu was only 5 years old when her parents were taken from her in that some violent feuds. She was too young to remember everything clearly. Faces blur in her memories, voices fading into silence. When she did remember was the emptiness, the sudden loss, and the way her elder brother held her tightly that night, swearing he would protect her no matter what. He took her far away from the city, far away from the mafia world, into the safety of the mountains. There in a quiet wooden house, Yu grew up surrounded by love and simplicity. Her brother and sister-in-law gave her the life their parents never would: peace, warmth, normalcy. She learned to rock again, to dream, to believe in kindness. By 18, Yu was breathtaking, beautiful in a way that was almost fragile. Her innocent, untouched by the world her family had once belonged to. Her days were filled with simplicity, simple joys. Helps her sister-in-law with cooking, walking through the alley with baskets of flowers, watching the sky turn cold every evening. She had no idea of the blood-soaked legacy buried in her past. To her, her father was only a blurred figure in memory. Her mother, a voice that sometimes came back to her dreams. She thought she was free. But Jungkook had never forgotten. He carried the memory of his father's death like a scar graved in his heart. He built his empire on the promise that one day he would erase every trace of the man who killed his father. For years, he searched, gathering pieces of information, causing rumors, and when the truth reached him that his enemies' children had survived, that they were living quietly in the mountains, as though the world had forgotten them, his fury reignited like fire meeting oil to Jungkook. It was unacceptable. His father had been buried in blood, and yet the rival bloodline still lagged. still breathed, still lived. It was not just about revenge anymore. It was about honor. It was about obsession. You knew nothing of this storm coming for her. She lived in blissful arrogance, but sometimes she catch strange details that made her uneasy. A black car on the distant road at night, its headlights lingered too long. Her brother's sudden silence when the past was mentioned, the way he checked the locks twice, sometimes 3 times before bed. He never explained, never told her the truth. He wanted her safe, even if that means leaving her blind. In the city, Jungkook stood before his man in a dark, dimly lit warehouse. The air was heavy with silence, the kind that waited to the broken. Dozens of eyes were on him, waiting loyal, ready to follow his command. He wore black as if the color had been stitched into his skin, his presence filling the room like a storm. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but sharp, cutting through the silence with a promise that made even his strongest man tense. I will burn his bloodline until the last breath. The words were not shouted. They didn't need to be. They carried the weight of faith. His men bowed their heads, understand that the order had been given. There would be no mercy, no hesitation. Yu's family was now his target. For 13 years, Yu lived far away from the city in a wooden house in the mountains. Life there was simple and peaceful. The sound of birds in the morning and the sound wind at night made her feel safe. To her, this quiet house was her whole world. She was only 5th when her parents died. You didn't remember much. Sometimes she dreamed of shouting voices, gunshots, and her mother's arm holding her tightly, but the memories always faded. Her brother never told her the truth. They are gone, you, they would say. They was all. He wanted her to stay innocent, far away from the cruel world that had taken everything from them. By 18, Yu had grown in a beautiful girl, soft, pure and gentle. Villagers often said she looked like someone too innocent for this world. She never imagined that her quiet life was about to end, because in the city, Jungkook had already found her. Jungkook, the most feared mafia leader, lived with darkness in his heart. He was known as ruthless, merciless, and untouchable. Men obeyed him without answering, because he will destroy them with a single command. He ordered coldly, "No one lives alive back in the mountains." Your brother sensed danger. He noticed cars parked too long near the valley. Strangers asking questions in the valley at night. He locked the doors and set a watch with his gun. He told you nothing, but she felt the change. She saw the worry in his eyes, the way his smile no longer reached his face. A strange fear began to grow inside her. Meanwhile, Jungkook prepared for the hunt. Maps of the mountains road were laid on the table. His men stood ready outside, black cars waiting, engines rumbling in the dark. Jungkook spoke in a cold voice. I will burn his bloodline until the last breath. The convoy of cars rolled out into the night. You had no idea that her world of peace was about to be shattered forever. The next morning was quiet in the valley. A thin fog floated between the trees, and the wooden house stood in silence, its window glowing softly with warm yellow light. Inside, her sister-in-law folding clothes and talking about something silly. Her brother sat near the door, smoking silently, his eyes fixed on the darkness outside. He had been tense for days, but he said nothing. But the peace was already breaking. Far away on the road, the silence shattered with the sound of engines. Black cars cut through the fog, headlights sharp and cold. The ground trembled as the convoy moved forward like predators in the night. At the center of it all sat Jungkook, dressed in black, his face curved with calm cruelty. His men followed his orders without a word, their eyes hard, their weapons ready. Jungkook's voice was steady as the cars climbed the narrow road. No mistake, he said, no mercy. He vowed from years ago, echoed in his mind. He will burn the bloodline until the last breath. The wooden house appeared in the distance, a lonely shadow in the valley. Jungkook's lips curved into a smile, a dark smile. Inside the house, your brother finally heard it, the low rumble of engines. His blood ran cold. He sat up quickly, his cigarette falling to the floor, his wife frozen, fear rising in her chest. What's wrong? She said softly. Her brother grabbed the gun from the cupboard, his face pale. Stay inside, he ordered sharply. Don't make a sound. And then it happened. The roar of engines stopped outside. Car doors slammed shut. A heavy footstep crunched against the gravel. Her brother stepped outside onto the porch, the gun in his hand, his eyes widened at the sight. Before him, rows of black cars, shadow of men dressed in black, and at the front, a tall figure with a dark aura that made the night itself seem colder. Jungkook, even in the darkness, his presence was overwhelming. He walked forward slowly, his black coat brushed against his leg, his eyes sharp like blades. There was no rush in his steps, no fear in his movement. He was a man who knew the world bowed to him. Jeon, Jungkook, Yu's brother whispered under his breath. His hand tightened on the gun. Jungkook stopped at the edge of the porch, his men spreading out behind him like shadows ready to strike. He tilted his head slightly, his cold eyes studying the man in front of him. You thought you could hide? Jungkook said softly, his voice low but cutting through the night like steel. You thought I would never find you, but blood always called to blood. Her brother raised the gun, his voice trembling but fear. Take your man and leave. You will not touch my family. Jungkook smiled faintly, but it was not warm, it was cruel. Your family, he repeated, almost amused. The same family that took my father's life. You try to speak of family when your blood is poisoned with betrayal. The afternoon sun was sinking behind the mountains. When you left house, she walked down the familiar dusty road with her bag on her shoulder, humming softly to herself. It had been an ordinary day, filled with classes, shattered with friends, and the small joy of her quiet life in the alley. She loved these walks home. The air smelled of pine, the streets were peaceful, and the sound of birds always followed her like music. It was the kind of place where nothing bad was supposed to happen, a place where life was simple. For 18 years, her brother had work hard to give her that safety, to keep her far from the world that had destroyed their parents. You never questioned it. She was content with her small world, her home and her family. But today felt different. The moment she turned into her street, something inside her chest tightened. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. The road was usually had only a few bicycles and cars, while lined with black cars, shiny, expensive and dangerous looking. They were not ordinary cars, but the kind that seemed power and money. The kind she had only ever seen in gangster movies. They stood parked in a perfect row, engines still humming faintly, their dark windows reflecting the dying sunlight. He stepped slowly, her breath catched. The scene didn't belong to her quiet valley. It was something pulled out of another world, a darker world. And then she noticed the men. Dozens of them dressed in black suits, still like shoulders behind the cars. They were tall, broad and armed. Some held guns casually against their chest, others rested their hands on weapons, and their belts, but all of them looked terrifying. Their faces were blank, cold, and sharp as stroke carved from stone. They didn't talk, they didn't laugh, they only stood waiting. Your heart began to race. She had never seen guns in real life before, not like this, not so many. At once, a fear wrapped around her throat like a rope, choking her breath. She looked around desperately, but there was no one else on the street, no neighbors watching curiously from their doors, no children playing outside. It was as if the entire area had been swallowed by silence, leaving only these black cars and the men who guided them. Her first thought was to turn back, her second thought was to run, but her feet refused to move. Her house was just ahead, past the walls of black cars and armed men. Her brother and sister-in-law were waiting inside. She told herself maybe this was not about her. Maybe it was something else, but deep down she knew better. Nothing about this felt random. Gathering what little courage she had, you forced herself to keep walking. Each step felt heavier than the last. The men turned their head as she passed, their eyes followed her with sharp interest. She could feel their stares burning into her skin, cold and merciless. Her hands trembled as she clenched her school bag tighter, her heart beating so loudly it joined in her ears. As they drew closer to her house, she saw even more men gathered near the porch. They stood in groups, speaking in low voices, checking their weapons. One of them noticed her and gave a faint smirk, as if amused by her fear. Yu's stomach twisted. She wanted to scream, to run into the forest and never look back, but her legs carried her forward in their own, dragging her closer and closer to the house that no longer looked safe. Her mind raced. Why were they here? What had happened? Where was her brother? Panic began to rise in her chest, clawing at her lungs. She had lived her whole life in peace, far from violence. She had never seen a fight worse than boys arguing in a school, but now she was standing on a street that looked like the start of a war. When she reached the front of her house, her step finally faltered. She stopped, frozen in place. The door was half open. A chair was knocked over on the porch. She thought she had heard something inside, voice, movement, maybe even a muffled cry. Her lips trembled. "Brother," she whispered under her breath, thought she knew he would not hear her from outside. From a moment she stood completely still, staring at the half-open door. Her fear locked in her place, but love pushed her forward. If her family was inside, if they were in danger, she couldn't just stand here. Taking a shaky breath, you stepped towards the door. One of the guards moved slightly, his sharp eyes on her, but he didn't stop her. None of them did. It was as if they were waiting for this movement, waiting for her to step into whatever horror lay beyond that floor. Her hands trembling violently as she reached for the doorknob. Her chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. Everything inside her screamed to run back, but her heart, full of fear for her brother and sister-in-law, gave her no choice. With one final shaky breath, you pushed the door open wider. The warm glow of her home split out into the cold, heavy night, and her world, her safe, innocent world, was about to collapse. The moment you stepped inside, her breath caught in her throat. This was not her home anymore. It was a battlefield. The warm little house where she had eaten breakfast that morning, where locked and quiet comfort usually lived, now looked unrecognizable. The living room was a disaster. The table was broken in half, chairs overturned, shattered glass fluttered across the floor like a sharp style. The curtains hung torn, the walls bore deep marks from boots on feet, and the smell of blood lingered in the air, making her stomach twist. Her eyes darted frantically around the room, and then she saw them. Her sister-in-law sat tight on a chair in the corner, robes biting into her wrist, tears streaming down her face. A tall guard in black stood behind her. One heavy hand gripped her shoulder. The other rested on a gun. She was sobbing uncontrollably, her body trembling, her lips moving with whispered prayers. The moment she noticed you, her sobs grew louder, her eyes wide with warning. You just chat, but before she could even reach her gaze fell on the floor and her heart shattered. Her brother, he was slumped on her knees, leaning against the wall, his face swollen and bloody. His shirt was torn, his arm bruised, and his breathing was wrecked. It looked like he had been beaten mercilessly, yet his eyes still burned with anger, blood dripping from his lips, staining the floor beneath him. "Brother," you cried, her voice breaking, and she dropped her back and rushed forward. He looked up weakly, and for a moment his expression softened, filled with both relief and despair. "You know," he whispered hoarsely, his voice cracking. He coughed painfully, spitting blood onto the floor. "You shouldn't be there. You need to run now." Tears filled her eyes as she stumbled to her knees beside him, clutching his shoulder desperately. "No, I can't. What happened to you? Who did this? Please tell me." Her words were trembling, broken, but her grip on her was tight, as if letting go would mean losing him forever. He groaned, his body shaking. They came for me, for us, these men. They worked for him." His voice faltered, his eyes filled with helpless rage. He tried to push her away, but he was too weak. "You need to escape before to see you. Please, you don't understand how dangerous this is." You tears split, her heart breaking at the sight of her strong brother brought down like this. "I will not leave you. I can't. I am so scared, brother, but I will not leave." She wrapped her arms around him, burying her face into his shoulder. Sobbing like a child, her sister-in-law cried harder, shaking her head violently, trying to warn you. The guard holding her tightly, his grip silencing her with a cruel shake. The sound of few sobs filled the room, mixing with the heavy silence that hung like a curse over the house. And then footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. The sound echoed from upstairs, each step making the wooden floor groan. The noise cut through everything, through you sobbing, through her brother pain, through her sister-in-law's muffled cries. Every head in the room turned towards the staircase. Even the guard seemed to stiffen, as thought the very sound demanded respect and fear. You frozen, her tears still on her cheeks, her arm still around her brother, but her body stiff as stone. Something inside her whispered that the true danger was coming now. Her brother's grip tightened weakly on her hand, his eyes widened with horror as he heard the steps, and his voice broke with dread. "No, no, not him. You listen to me. When he comes, don't speak, don't move. Don't draw his attention. Please me." His voice cracked as he coughed again, his body trembling violently. But it was too late. The steps grew louder, closer, until silence fell across the house. Even the guards stopped moving, their eyes flickering to the stairs, their bodies straightening as though preparing for judgment. You blood ran cold. She tightened her grip on her brother, her whole body trembling as she turned her eyes forward the staircase. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. She wanted to run, but her legs refused to move. She wanted to hide, but there was nowhere to go. And then his voice. It was deep, smooth, but filled with deadly calm. A joint down the staircase like a shadow made of sound. Good, the voice said. Now the three of you can die together. You breath catch. Her skin prickled with fear and her entire body went numb. She turned her head slowly, her eyes looking on the staircase. A figure appeared, dressed entirely in black, tall and powerful. He moved with calm control, each step echoing like the strike of a drum. His aura filled the air, heavy, suffocating, demanding fear. The men in the room lowered their heads as if his very presence crushed them. Your lips parted in shock, their eyes frozen. Tears frozen in her cheeks. Jungkook. The atmosphere inside the house grew darker with every passing second. As though the very air bent under the weight of his presence, you could barely breathe. Her chest tightened, her heart racing so fast she thought it might burst. She held on to her brother's arm, trembling violently, her tears still wet on her cheeks. Every instant in her body screamed to run, but her body was frozen, trapped by fear. You felt her breath hitch as his cold gaze swept across the room. It lingered for a moment on her tight sister-in-law, then on her beaten brother. But when his eyes finally found her, everything inside her frozen. Jungkook stopped walking. For the first time since he had entered, his expression shifted, his dark eyes widened silently, his lips parted in the faintest sign of surprise. You stood there, fragile and trembling, her beauty raw and unprotected, her innocence radiating even in such terror. For a moment, Jungkook called Mars flattered he was catch off guard, struck by how breathtaking she looked, even with fear clouding the features. But then he remembered she was not just a girl, she was not just another face, she was the daughter of his father's sworn enemy. The bloodline he had vowed to erase, the one he had sworn with his own voice to destroy until not a single drop of their blood remained. His expression hardened again, colder, darker, more dangerous whenever a strange spark her beauty had lit inside him. He buried it deep beneath layers of rage and vengeance. His aura grew heavier, darker, and you felt it like chains around her body. She flinched violently when his gaze sharpened, her small hands clutching her brother's arm so tightly her knuckles turned white. Jungkook took a step forward, and the sound of his boots on the broken floor made your heart pound even louder. Her brother groaned, pulling her closer, whispered desperately, "Don't look at him, don't give him a reason." But it was useless. Jungkook's eyes were already locked on her, and nothing could break that hold. The room was silent, expected for the sound of her shadow breathing. Her sister-in-law was crying softly in the corner, but you couldn't even hear it anymore. All she could feel was suffocating weight of his gaze pressing down on her, tearing away every ounce of safety she had ever known. Eyes narrowing. Finally, Jungkook spoke. His voice was sharp, steady, terrifying, calm. "So," he said slowly, his eyes narrowing, "the bloodline lives." You shivered at his words. She didn't fully understand, but her brother did. He raised his head, clinging through his pain. "Leave her out of this. She has nothing to do with it." His voice was weak but defiant. Jungkook's eyes flickered to him, bravely sharp as knives. Then he looked back at you. She was something to do with it, he replied coldly. You tears split our again. Her body trembling uncontrollably, she wanted to speak, to beg, to say she didn't understand, but her throat felt locked. Even if she tried, no words would come. Her fear was too strong. Jungkook stepped closer, the distance between them stretching, his aura pressing harder and harder against her fragile frame. She flinched back, clutching her brother, her breath swollen and broke. Every movement he made sent a fresh wave of terror through her body. Her hands trembled violently, and when she finally stopped, just a few steps away, her knees nearly gave out. He tightened his head slightly, studying her face in silence, as if torn between two instincts, one to destroy her, the other to claim her. His jaw clenched, his eyes flicking with something darker than simple hatred, obsession, possession, a dangerous hunger that he would quite hide. Her brother noticed it too, and his voice rose desperate. Don't touch her. If you want revenge, take me. Don't hurt her. Jungkook's gaze flickered to him once more, and cruel smirk touched his lips. You think you still have to say? His voice dripped with ice. The guard shifted uncomfortably, the tension in the room growing unbearable. You felt faint, her head spinning from fear and confusion. She didn't understand why this man looked at her like she was both a curse and a prize. She didn't know why her brother was so afraid of him, and why her heart was breaking with terror at the thought of what might happen next. And then Jungkook moved again. Slowly he reached out his hand towards her, his fingers brushing the air between them. You flinched violently, a choked gasp escaping her lips. She pressed herself tighter against her brother, her entire body trembling like a trap, but the small movement of his hand had been enough to shatter her completely. Jungkook's eyes darkened. He could see it, her fear, her innocence, her fragility, and it stirred something dangerous inside him. He tripped on control, on fear, and the way she recoiled from even the idea of his touch sent a sharp thrill through him. She was not like the others who tried to challenge him or beg loudly of mercy. No, she was different, and in that moment he knew he was not going to kill her.